Hello. Anybody there? Anybody watching? I think I'm on. Hi. So I see there are people joining now. Um, welcome. So I'm Owen Woods. I'm a second year vet student at the RVC in London. I'm at a vets for a couple of years, on and off in between studying. And I have quite an interest in either possibly going into surgery in small animals or emergency and critical care in small animals. Um, because that's something I really enjoyed while working at the vets. So I'm going to be talking about current affairs in the veterinary world. Um, so first of all, why do you need to know? Why do you need to know about what's going on in the veterinary world? Um, First of all, it's really good to get yourself sort of aware of the different challenges that you might face in well, as a vet or a vet student. It's a really good way of being aware of the profession and what's sort of going on, the issues that will be affecting everyone, like yourselves and clients as well. It's really good for interviews, so interview skills. Obviously, current affairs will be really important for in sort of lines of questioning. They'll want to know if you know what you're talking about, if you know um, about the world that you're going into. Um, and it's also really good to get yourself sort of yourselves acclimatized to sort of thinking about ethical questions, because a lot of the things that will be talked about and debated in the profession involve ethics and how you might be interacting with clients and the animals, and it might affect the decisions you make, even as a student, on placements. Um, yeah, so what will I be talking about today, or in this webinar? Mental health, that's a huge issue that's affecting the profession at the minute. Breeding, I'm sure most of you have heard on the news. There's been a lot of talk about brachycephalic breeds, so breeds with short noses and shortened snouts. Brexit, that is a huge topic at the minute. It will affect both the farming industry, the food industry, how how animal byproducts will be imported and exported, because as vets you're involved in safeguarding the food chain and just general animal welfare, because a lot of the laws that the EU are involved, well, made, really do affect the job. Intensive farming, that's another topic, with densities, and there are lots of concerns with animal rights groups about how we keep our animals, and um, um, leading on to the next topic, ethical slaughter. Obviously, I'm just giving you a quick breakdown of what I'll sort of like to chat about. We might not go through all of it because there's there's so much going on that I could be talking to you for hours and hours and hours, and yeah, there's just so much going on. CCTV in the abattoirs, that's a big topic. There was a huge debate about that recently, and it's that there will be mandatory CCTV being placed in abattoirs to watch over the workers, to make sure that animal welfare standards are being kept. Antimicrobial resistance, that's huge in both veterinary medicine and normal medicine. And then that leads into One Health, which hopefully I'll be able to chat about as well. That's another huge topic. And then hopefully I'll be able to give you some tips on finding your own research sources so you can do your own research, and then take some questions. So first of all, mental health. So I don't know whether any of you will have heard, but mental health is a huge issue in the profession at the minute. Vets are 4 times more likely than the average population to commit suicide, and I'm sure that I don't know the statistics myself, for this myself, but the mental health statistics must be worse, obviously, as suicide is the ultimate result of these problems. So what would lead to these issues? There are a lot of different factors that sort of lead into this problem, from in the workplace, in the culture, the stresses of the job. The first of which would be, I guess, working hours. So as vets, with the same as similar to doctors, I guess, you could be working for 12-hour shifts or even longer. I've done 12-hour shifts at my job, even as like a nursing assistant, not even a vet. And that puts a lot of stress on a person. It's quite difficult. You go to sleep, sometimes you've been up all day thinking, stressing about these animals, and then you've got to sort of put it all behind you, and that's really difficult when you're tired, you're stressed, you've just been running around all day, feeling undervalued. That's a big problem. All of these things I'm mentioning have been picked up in surveys, by the way. So surveys led by vet schools and by the British Veterinary Association. So feeling undervalued, that's both the problem of the clients and sometimes the management and the other staff. So the clients, often they've got their own things to worry about. They're stressing about their pets, money, how they're going to pay for the veterinary care. And you as a vet, you've got to meet those demands. And sometimes you're caught in between. You could be caught in between the interests of the clients and yourself or your boss, or caught in between the interests of the owners and the animals. I've seen from my own experience, sometimes owners will bring in animals that that are healthy, and the owners want them to be put down for various reasons. Maybe financial reasons, if they can't pay for them, or if there's been a debridement. I think that's the right word. A debridement where the current owners have been given these animals from which belonged to family members, and now they can't look after them. And rather than giving them to shelters or selling them, they just want them to be put down. or if the owners can't afford for treatment, obviously it's really expensive. People don't quite realize how expensive treatment for their animals are. But coming from a climate where you're so used to the NHS and just having free healthcare, people don't realize how expensive vets bills can get. And when they can't afford to pay, the next route is to euthanize the animals. And those are really hard things to deal with as a vet. It's if things could be done differently, and you could in theory do better for this animal, but you're limited in what you can do because of these other constraints, then it can be really difficult. In a few cases that I've seen, just as a nursing assistant at my local vets, just that they were really quite difficult to deal with, really emotional, and all the vets just wanted to take the animal in and care for it, but that you can't always do that. And a lot of the time, there are well, yeah, that sort of leads into the culture that sort of accepts euthanasia. That's really present in the veterinary industry. Obviously, as vets, you'll probably have to put to sleep some animals in your career. That's almost a given. And it sort of normalizes death to an extent. So all this leads sort of into into this problem. So that's a huge topic at the minute. At the RVC where I study, they spend a lot of money and time developing and making sure we have resources available for us as students, because studying is stressful, and studying a veterinary degree or a medical degree is possibly, I can't guarantee, but possibly more stressful for a lot of people than if you were to study another degree that might not have these ethical challenges. So yeah, the RVC and a lot of institutions such as the British Veterinary Association and the Association of Veterinary Students, they're doing a lot of things to try and improve mental health for vet students and vets. And then the next topic that I think was really worth talking about was breeding and ethics. So you've probably seen a lot on the news recently about brachycephalic dogs. That's a huge topic, but it's not just limited to brachycephalic dogs. So in case you didn't know, or you weren't here earlier, brachycephalic dogs are dogs with shortened snouts, and they're bred to have their snouts shortened, and that can cause a lot of problems for breathing, for the orbit around the eye. I've seen pugs with their eyes popped out because the pressures in the skull change, and it could just be as simple as the owner playing with their animal and the eye just pops out. It's quite awful. So that's a huge topic. It brings up a lot of sort of ethical concerns with, we're doing this to our animals. Breeders and the kennel club have breed standards which they try and breed their animals to, and that just really, the year after year, will change to suit the perfect dog in that breed, and their snouts just keep getting shorter. The problems keep getting worse. I think so a statistic I found earlier was 45% of small animal vets surveyed said that breeding, and brachycephalic breeding specifically, was their top concern with animal welfare. And that again, that's huge. That's half, almost half of the small animal veterinary profession, says that's their top concern. That's a huge issue, and at the minute there's not a lot being done about it. Everybody's blaming everyone. Vets blame the kennel club, but obviously for their breeding standards and their regulations. But the kennel club blame the rogue breeders. So breeding isn't very regulated in the UK at the minute. There's no one really to police how the how the vets are, well, how the breeders are breeding their animals. Nobody's going to come barging in and knock down someone's door for breeding a smaller Chihuahua or a pug with a shorter face. It doesn't tend to happen. So yeah, it's a really difficult thing to talk about. And obviously owners, there's a culture where we'll see pugs and Chihuahuas on the internet, YouTubers and other celebrities with these animals, and the general public want to buy these because they're cute. Yeah, they are cute, and pugs have amazing temperaments. I'll be the first one to say I love pugs. They are so lovely, always friendly, but they suffer for what we've done to them. And a lot of breeds are born and bred to have shorter, more painful, more suffering in their lives. It's not pleasant. And then it's not limited to brachycephalic dogs as well. There's a lot of issues with pure breeds. So Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. There's a huge problem with mitral valve disease. So one of the valves in the heart just not over time just becoming more defective, or they're being born with this predisposition to disease in their heart. And I've heard, just through work, I've heard some of these heart murmurs, and sometimes they're quite severe, quite obvious. And these Cavalier King Charles Spaniels are also really prone to neurological disorders. German Shepherds have a huge problem with hip dysplasia. So the hips not lining up properly, and they can develop really problems with joint disease, and it's just really it's not nice to see. And the ethical problems with this is obviously we're breeding them to have more painful lives, and more suffering in their lives, and it's not helpful at all. And then something that I learned quite recently in my lectures is that the breeding affects immunity, and their health and fighting disease. So you might have heard in your A levels, if you're there, about the MHC complex. I'm not going to go into too much detail because that's not what this talk is about. But that's a molecule. It's a receptor involved in immunity, and a big reason for that being effective in immunity is there's a huge variation amongst individuals, and you'll receive some from your mum, some from your dad, but there's in specific breeds, because of the genetic pool being so small, there's a limited variation. So things like autoimmunity can be a problem. Things like not responding to vaccinations in Rottweilers. African wild dogs is an example where they don't have much resistance to viruses. It's breeding is a huge issue, and something that really needs tackling. But how it's going to be regulated and who's to blame, it's there aren't many answers until we can find a way of policing breeders or making sure that breeders have licenses. These things aren't going to change. The next topic that I thought I'd talk about would be Brexit. Exciting, all important Brexit. So people have really huge varied opinions on Brexit and how it'll affect the UK. But it's really it's a huge topic in the veterinary world, because obviously we're dealing with farmers. We deal with safeguarding the food chain, safeguarding animal byproducts, and all of these different things. And that also has a knock-on effect to the UK's economy. So vets are really important in Brexit, and something that really needs to be considered. What can't be taken too lightly. So I read recently that vets make up about 50% of the new workforce veterinary industry every year. So think about that for a second. If we put restrictions on who can come and work in the UK, then we could be limiting the workforce, and then that has knock-on effects with obviously animal care, animal welfare in both the small animal practice, where you'll take your cats and your dogs. If there aren't enough staff, then we'll be understaffed. Your animals might not get the care that they need. That will affect farming, and how animals are kept, and the policing of how they're kept, and whether their welfare is good enough, and whether they have a humane slaughter as well, which I'll talk about later on, hopefully, if we've got enough time. So that's a huge concern, and also things that aren't directly animal related. So like trade deals. There's a lot of concern about the trade of grain, and other plant material that might be used in feed. Obviously, if their prices go up significantly, then that will have a knock-on effect on farmers, and how much money and time and effort they can spend, making sure that the animals get the right food, the right care, the right health care. And then it's just a huge topic that affects more than just the veterinary industry, because obviously if the feed prices go up as well, then the farmers will have to spend more on feeding their animals. The meat prices will go up, and then obviously we'll have to spend more money when we go to to buy our minced beef for our spaghetti bolognese. So it has huge knock-on effects. I also read that there was concern with availability of medicines, because we don't produce our own. Well, some of them we might, but we don't produce all of our own medicines in the UK. And the EU have a lot of say in what medicines are licensed here, and what medicines can be imported. So obviously, if we've got to sort out our own legislation, and it, the knock-on effects could be huge if we don't have the same medicines available to us. Will we be able to treat our animals appropriately in the best way possible? There's been concern about whether degrees from the EU are recognised here. So the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, along with the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, drew up a plan. To aid negotiators who are, well, obviously talking with the EU, trying to get the best deals for us. To make sure that they can make these things happen, whether so we get the best deals with medicines so that they're not affected, migrants, that they can help us sustain our veterinary industry, and degree recognition. Obviously, if vets in Europe are contributing huge amounts to the UK's veterinary industry, they they make up 50% of the new workforce every year. So if we don't recognise their degrees, then that could mean huge losses to the industry, and also data sharing, and research collaboration. That's another important thing that the EU do. They provide the infrastructure for sharing data about diseases that are transferred between species, human and animals. If we can't share data to track these diseases, then we're at a loss. We could be exposed to all of these different diseases, such as like rabies, that we might not have tracked. We could have tracked more efficiently had we had that communication between countries there, and research as well. So research universities often collaborate a lot, but universities will often collaborate with each other on projects, and we have the research, we have the infrastructure there within the EU to collaborate, and obviously we want the best infrastructure there to facilitate this research, so we can advance veterinary medicine and that we can improve the care of our animals. Next up, I think, was antibiotic resistance. So a survey that I read about said that 9 out of 10 vets were concerned about antibiotic resistance. And this isn't a problem that's just limited to animals. This is really huge in medicine as well. I'm sure you've heard it's hit the news quite a lot over the last few years. Probes and bacteria becoming resistant to the drugs that we depend on to cure us, and obviously becoming resistant, we might become ill and die of some of these diseases and problems that we used to die of years ago. Infections from simple cuts, diarrhea. It's really scary stuff. And a lot of people are blaming the veterinary industry and the farming industry. I've seen myself on various placements and work experience placements, and you might yourselves as well. Farmers are quite liberal sometimes with the antibiotics that they're able to inject themselves, and that's not a good thing, because obviously if they don't need the antibiotics, or they don't receive the right course, the right doses, it could lead to resistance. We'd wipe out all of the bacteria that aren't resistant, leaving only the resistant bacteria. I'm sure you know how this works. From if you're in A levels, you'd probably be aware of this. And then the new colonies that grow will be the resistant bacteria. That causes all sorts of problems. So vets and doctors really do have a responsibility in teaching our clients. Making sure that they as humans, complete our courses, take the right doses, that we teach the owners how to administer the medication properly. I don't know if any of you have cats and have tried to give them pills. It's quite a challenge sometimes. I've been almost bitten in practice while trying to tablet a cat. It's quite difficult, and they don't always get the right doses. So that's education is so important. It's invaluable, really, in the fight against antibiotic resistance. There's a new initiative, or a new push for testing of bacteria, and targeting the antibiotics that we use in a case-to-case basis. Obviously, it can't always be done. It's quite expensive. I think it's more common in medicine now. I can't be sure, because I'm not a doctor, but I think it's becoming more common to test bacteria and to use the most appropriate antibiotic for the case, just to make sure that we're not throwing loads of antibiotics on probes that won't respond, and then will become resistant, and then we'll be able to share their resistance with other bacteria sometimes. And also, there's a lot of talk about putting restrictions on the use of antibiotics in the agricultural sector. So, limiting how much how much antibiotics that can be prescribed and sold. But then that might lead to bad practice with administering the antibiotics. Then farmers might be tempted to sort of miss that last dose, because then they'll have some antibiotics spare for the next case, and that just creates the problem. So there's again, this is a huge topic with no real fix. Researchers are looking for alternatives. I think there's a book that I've read on bacteriophages. So those are viruses that kill bacteria. I found that really interesting. But again, it's very expensive because it's individualized, and there's a lot of problem with approving those drugs. And then looking for new antibiotics. So there are people. I've read stories about people climbing into caves and looking for new plants and new molecules that might be useful in the fight against bacteria, but that just prolongs the issue. Eventually bacteria will start to become resistant to those new antibiotics. So that's a huge concern. And education really, I think, is the key. Education and limiting the amount of antibiotics that are prescribed and administered. But it's such a huge topic again, and I with an hour's to talk to you guys, there's no way that we'll get into depth on that. That's it's really to be aware of, and that's a huge topic of conversation at the minute. The next topic that I was going to talk about was intensive farming, animal welfare, um, and different charities that deal with animal rights, such as PETA or Greenpeace. That they're often seen on the news protesting about animal rights and about ensuring that animals get the recognition they deserve and the treatment that they deserve. To stop bad practice. But yeah, so there are a lot of controversial things in intensive farming. So up for you guys. So intensive farming, in case you weren't quite sure what I meant by that, is a method of farming which uses lots of high input, so need lots of animals to create a lot of output, so a lot of meat, and then in turn a lot of money. And there are loads of issues with that, with how we keep our animals, so how closely we keep them together. I don't know whether any of you have seen pictures of battery farming with hens. They're packed in quite tight sometimes, and it's not pleasant to see. But there are huge strides being made in the industry, constantly trying to better conditions for these animals. And then and then another issue with sort of how we keep them stocking is pigs and farrowing crates. So not all of you might know, farrowing crates are crates that pigs are kept in when they're pregnant and about to give birth, through until the piglets are old enough to and big enough to not be crushed by the mother. So these are crates where the sow, the mother, can stand up and eat and drink, but they can't turn around or move that much. And that's it's mostly to stop the sow, the mother, from crushing piglets. Obviously, you're limiting the quality of life for the mother. They can't move for long periods of time. They can't, often in indoor units where the pigs are kept indoors, they won't see the light of day for long periods of time. It's really quite a big debate. I understand the benefits. Obviously, the more piglets survive, which means that more money can be made from the meat. But it's not pleasant sometimes, and they might get sores. Their quality of life really is restricted. They might get muscle pains, they can't stand up or stretch. It's something that you've really got to try and get to grips with on an individual level. And it's something that you'll definitely come across as a vet student on placements. I'm going to do my pig placement this year, hopefully. Well, I will be doing my pig placement this year, and that's something that I'm going to have to deal with. Other issues with intensive farming. So there's a lot of debate about sort of procedures that are done on the animals without pain relief. So I've on one of my dairy placements, I helped disbud some calves. So disbudding is when you remove dehorning is when you remove the horn with a hot metal iron, And disbudding is when you burn the bud of the horn when the calves are still young to prevent the horn from growing and developing. Um, and some places will do it with pain relief, and some places will do it without pain relief. I think there's legislation on this, and I'm not 100% sure of it. I think there are, with these pain relief, with these procedures without pain relief, there are often restrictions on when you can do it. So after a certain age, you can't perform these procedures on an animal. Another example would be castration and tail docking of lambs and calves meant for meat. So essentially, what you do is you get a rubber band, and you'll have this device where you squeeze it, and it'll open the rubber band, and you put it around the testicles or the tail, and then you let it go, and it cuts the blood circulation off. And it can be really distressing to the animal if it's, well, it can be. Imagine, obviously we don't have tails, but imagine if somebody cut the blood supply to your finger. That would be quite painful. So that's an area of debate whether it's right to do these things without pain relief. And it's something that you'll have to do as a vet student as well. But yeah, so these are all really quite ingrained with and linked into veterinary ethics and your own sense of morality as well. And it's as a vet student, they're definitely things that you'll have to deal with. Yeah. Hang on, I'll just consult my notes a second. Yeah, and then another issue with intensive farming is competition, and whether there food competition around feed and how you feed the animals. So obviously, if you want bigger returns, if you want more meat and more money, then you'll want to feed the animals more, and you'll want to keep more animals. So there's a lot of problems sometimes that I've witnessed sometimes while I was lambing. That there would be lots of sheep around one trough, and they might not all be getting enough food. Or sometimes it's the other way around. So they'll be fed so much that they might become obese. They might develop problems, with brittle bones. So that's a problem with chickens. So they develop a lot of problems with osteoporosis and brittle bones because of their weight. And then when they flop about and they fly around, they'll break their legs. And it's obviously that's not the best way to be keeping your animals, and it's a real case of just weighing up what's best for you and best for money, and what's best for the animal, and whether you can justify it. And these are things that are constantly being debated in the veterinary industry. What's acceptable to tail dock without pain relief, or whether it's acceptable to castrate before a certain age. And again, these are hot topics, really really important. So we're running on in time at the minute, so we're almost getting to the end of the slot. I haven't covered CCTV in slaughterhouses yet, or ethical slaughter, or One Health, which was another thing that I wanted to talk about. So I'll quickly run through those. So CCTV in slaughterhouses, that's been huge very recently. So CCTV in slaughterhouses is now mandatory. So the Defra announced earlier on this month, actually, that in England, every slaughterhouse would have CCTV monitoring the workers to make sure that animals are, you know, are handled and slaughtered in the correct ways to maintain, good practice and good welfare, so that obviously they're not suffering unnecessarily before they die. And some people were really concerned about this. I think the Association of Independent Meat Suppliers were worried that this would be discriminatory. So obviously, hospitals, you wouldn't think that hospitals are, have CCTV in every room to monitor the doctors. In care homes, there's not always CCTV to monitor the staff. So they were worried that it's discriminating against people in the meat industry. They were also concerned about privacy, whether it was right to have people watching all the time and monitoring you and how you're doing your job, and the ethics of that. And then also they were worried about retaining staff in the industry. So would people be likely to want to work in an abattoir if they're going to have somebody peering over their shoulder all the time? Whether people will leave the industry because of that, and those are very just arguments. They're very real concerns for people. But something that really struck me actually was that 99% of people working in the industry, this is very generic title, so I'm not exactly sure who was surveyed, vets or the people in the abattoirs, but it was quite a striking statistic. 99% of people working in the industry supported this. So actually, it doesn't seem like it's that much of an issue to the workers. Again, I don't know who exactly this statistic applies to, but it doesn't seem like many people were too opposed to it. So hopefully, it will increase better standards in slaughtering and animal welfare. Yeah, and then ethical slaughter. That's another thing that I really wanted to touch on, and I'll touch on that quickly. So, hugely controversial, slaughter without stunning. So, some of you might be aware of halal and religious meats. They're not meant to be stunned before slaughter, and they're meant to be their throats are meant to be slit, and then they die by bleeding out. And in some breeds, in some species, this isn't so much of an issue, because they'll lose consciousness very quickly and they'll die fairly humanely. But especially in sheep and goats, the way the blood supplies the brain is different. So when their throats are slit, they are conscious for some time, even minutes sometimes, before actually dying. And that's clearly not very pleasant for the animals. So that's a huge debate. Should we allow halal and religious slaughter in this country? Some people say not. And another issue relating to that was the British Veterinary Association. Their president actually said that there's a higher supply for this meat than demand from the communities that obviously want it. So that's quite huge. So more animals are being slaughtered by these religious methods than people wanting to consume this meat. And then, he also said that sometimes, this meat will enter the general market, but not be labeled as such. So, if you disagree with this practice, then you could be eating meat that, obviously you don't want to eat. And these are huge issues, and things that really do need sorting. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on before I take questions and give you a few details about how to find out about what's going on in the vet world and where to find resources, was One Health. So the One Health initiative is huge at the minute. A lot of universities are doing postgraduate degrees or postgraduate courses about One Health. So what is it? It's an sorry, my words. It's an initiative about recognizing the link between human health and animal health and the ecosystem. So what that essentially means is that our health as humans are linked to the healths of the animals around us, and that makes a lot of sense. It might be fairly obvious to you, and you'd think, why do we even need to speak about this specifically? But there's a long-standing history of the veterinary profession and the medical world being quite separate. Health initiative, they're aiming to sort of bring the two worlds together and create research links and educational links and cooperation between the different worlds to improve health for all of the species. So obviously making people more aware of how we could be affecting our pets, our companion animals, how we could be affecting our livestock in the way that we treat them. There's a lot of work in abroad at the minute for educating people in Africa on how to properly care for their animals and ensure that they're not suffering if they're not getting the right diets or the right they're being overworked. And then on the flip side, there's a lot of work educating people on how to dispose of waste, so so we're not becoming contaminated, introducing diseases from animals into our population, and that we're not spreading zoonosis. And it's again it's huge and it's quite interesting. And there's a lot of work being done at the minute, and a lot of universities are offering postgraduate qualifications now in One Health, just to sort of encourage this. And then I'll quickly go through where you might be able to do this research and where you'll be able to find some of these resources. So I used the British Veterinary Association's website. That was really helpful. They have a little tab about news and current affairs, and that had loads of different things about Brexit, what was going on, talks of negotiations, and how it might affect the veterinary industry and the farming industry. The AVS website, so that's the Association of Veterinary Students. That was really useful. It had a quick breakdown of sort of current affairs. That's definitely worth a look. I really found when I was applying to vet school, just on work experience, asking farmers or vets if they had any magazines lying around, old magazines. Sometimes they'll even give you new, fresh ones, because often vets get magazines like the Veterinary Times, In Practice, the veterinary Record, delivered, to the practice, and they won't even read them. So that's something you can benefit from. And then, farmers, the Farmers Weekly, the Farmers Guardian. There are all sorts of things that you can ask for, and they'll often give you, that will really give you a good insight into what's going on in the industry, and what what will be affecting the world that you're hoping to enter. And then also, news websites, the BBC, Guardian, Telegraph, others are available. They often have, things, especially with antimicrobial resistance and brachycephalic breeding. There's a lot going around on news websites at the minute. And then if you're really, really, really keen, Defra, the Department of, I can't remember the acronym. Department for Environment and Farming, and the Department for Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs. So that's Defra, and APHA is the Animal and Plant Health Agency. So their websites will have loads of information about TB, diseases, monitoring food, and the farming industry. And then the student room, but be aware with the student room, not everything you'll read on there is correct or accurate, and some of it might be opinion based. And it's the same with other blogs and internet websites. Not all of it will be 100% accurate. But yeah, go ahead, do your own research, have fun, enjoy it. There's so much to read, and I found it really useful, going into my interviews, knowing a little bit about what I was getting myself in for. That sort of brings me to a close, really. Any questions? Feel free to send questions in if you want. I think there's a chat. I'll give it a couple of minutes before I go. But any questions, just let me know. Yeah. Well, I'm waiting to see if there are any questions. A few things that are really important in sort of ethics, especially with animal welfare. A few things to consider, or maybe to research, might be the 5 freedoms. So those are really important in sort of guidelines for animal care, and animal welfare. They're mentioned in a lot of the handbooks for caring for production animals, such as cows and sheep. So the 5 freedoms, basically freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort. So that would be making sure that obviously that they have the appropriate environment and shelter. Freedom from pain, injury and disease. Freedom to express normal behavior. So obviously interacting with other animals, obviously making sure that they're kept with, if they're a herd animal, making sure that they're kept with herds, or in view of other animals. And then freedom from fear and distress, obviously making sure that they're handled correctly, and they're respected. So that's something to look into. And something else to look into for ethics, might be utilitarianism. That's a concept that's quite important in ethics. But yeah, do your own research. It'll really stand you in good stead. Right. So yeah, I don't think there are any more questions coming in. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for coming and watching me blabber on for a little while. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Bye.